What does Israel have to teach the West? What do we do with the Jews? Right? What do we do with them? Which implies we don't really want them, but what do we do with them? There's no Jewish problem if we just get rid of their Jewishness. Integrate, integralism. That's the root of the word. The right, they have this philosophy, but they don't even care about their own philosophy. It's just this book they can kind of point to, this list of books they can point to say, this is why we want to take all the power. I don't say Never Again is now as a brand. I'm really concerned.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming in this rainy, chilly night, the only winter night in Jerusalem. Tonight we're going to have a conversation between two very impressive people. And we're honored to have an American guest here that we owe him much. I think, one, as people who care about ideas, and second of all, as Israelis and Jews. Dr. James Lindsay, I know him, following him and translating his book for the past couple of years, but I had the privilege to spend time with him in the last couple of months. And as I try to define myself as one who cares about ideas, James has the ability to be very, not only clear about the ideas he understands, but also very honest about it. You know, sometimes it's very easy to talk about things, to say how things are important. But every idea has to have the individual, the vessel, who manifests the idea into reality, takes it forward, and makes a real difference. You can even, let's say, try to say, it's not accurate, it's a little bit Hegel, but many ways history is actually made by people who understand ideas and translate them to decisions and actions. So if you read history, you can see a lot of ideas manifested into a lot of trends in the world. And there's one trend that is happening in the empire. Our empire today, the United States of America, which is the current, let's say, most important, even in history, state. There is a trend that is an intellectual, social, cultural trend that is moving inside America. And the only one individual who recognized it and articulated it on time was James. But beyond that, James had the courage, the ability to fight, to stand strong against it, and maybe, and this is too early to say, but maybe to shift the trajectory of history that might be, or maybe will be, we will see in the next couple of years, following that crazy trend of woke right. We can see that it happened with the woke left, that people were standing on the right against the woke. But the courage to fight inside your social group and paying the individual price is something that we need to praise. And that's our privilege to have someone like Dr. James Lindsay. So aside of his PhD in mathematics and physics, and aside of the fact that he wrote 12 books, his courage and his ability to connect the abstract ideas to the real world is his, in my perspective, the most important virtue James Lindsay has, and it's our honor and our privilege as Israelis and Jews to have him on our side. So first of all, we need to thank him with applause, and Dr. James Lindsay. He will be in conversation with a young intellectual, and I don't think I'm overstating, one of the most brilliant minds we have today in Israel, definitely on the conservative side. I know Sagi, Dr. Sagi Barmak, almost a decade now. And he's in his mid-30s. Did his PhD on American history, was a teacher, slowly became an important teacher inside Herut, inside the Gaman Institute, leading the public policy Smith program, and then getting the leadership of Hashiloach magazine, writing dozens of important articles, and actually I think being one of the only Israelis who has the ability, again, to understand deep ideas, to have a very, very sophisticated ability to articulate them and write them and teach them, the variety of skills. But the thing that puts Sagi and James together is their virtues, their personality. They're both humble, honest intellectuals. So a conversation with them, you can actually learn in depth what they think, and they're honest about their ideas. So this is going to be a very great conversation. I want to thank you all for coming again, and I want to invite Dr. James Lindsay and Dr. Sagi Barmak.
It's great to see you here, and thank you all for coming, for taking the time to join us in this hopefully fruitful conversation. So let's dive right in. Hello, James.
Hello, Sagi.
We have a lot to discuss. Let's start on a personal note. So correct me if I'm wrong. It is your second visit here to Israel. What is your impressions, and did you learn something new about the Israeli people?
No, I knew it all coming in. No, this is an amazing country. And of course, I learned something new. Gosh, I could tell you a dozen things, I think. But I'll just tell a quick kind of story from my trip this time. As those of you who know or followed my travels or heard the podcast, which I'm betting is many of you, last time I recorded a podcast after my visit in October titled I'm Israel Chai, because it turns out I connected with that idea on my first trip. And part of that was going to Yad Vashem, but part of it was also going to the Gaza envelope and seeing the kibbutzim and the Nova Festival site. And so I came back into the United States and told the story in this podcast, and I guess it was very moving. People liked it. So I went back down Monday. I could have gone with the conference delegation and gone to the Tower of David, which I went the day before. But instead I went south. And it's harder the second time, it turns out. It's much harder the second time. There's something about that second time when I went, at least, I don't know, maybe your mileage may vary, your kilometerage may vary. When I went the second time, there was a combination, there was less of the shock. First of all, shock makes it easier. And then there's the memory of what I had learned and digested from the previous time. So we walk around Kibbutz Neros, which did not have a good time on October 7th, and the gentleman who does security took us around and showed us the things and told us his stories, and as they do. And we finished this kind of look. And as we start to walk back to the car, we're done. We've seen what we've seen. The last thing we look at is Gaza over there, and we start to head back. One of the other people in our group asks him very politely, says, you know, and it's a very real question, why did you come back? Right? And I get it, it's your home, but some bad things happen there. It's a hard question. Why did you come back? And this wasn't my conversation, so I overheard this, and I didn't continue. He continued talking afterwards with explanation that I never heard. I heard his first two words, and he said, Jewish values. And so I thought, wow, what does Israel have to teach the West? You know, it'd be so easy to just step into the victim mentality, poor us, history for 3,000 years, history over the last 80 years, history over the last 2.5 years, and say, you know, poor us. But that's not what this place is about, and that's not what this people is about. What this place and people are about is Israel Chai. We go back, we rebuild, we do our best, we don't forget. It's a country of memory, it's a people of memory, and yet we build, we grow, we be fruitful and multiply. That's the deal, right? That's part of the program, and it's just striking. It's just striking. So it's an amazing people, whether it's faith, whether it's character, whether it's good upbringing, whether it's rugalak, I don't know.
It's the knafe. Okay, so let us zoom out for a moment, and I'm going to ask you a really simple and small question. What the hell is happening to the American right?
Madness. I mean, mind virus is a word, actually. I think that actually applies. I think this is it's a kind of spiritual and mental, somewhere where the spiritual and mental come together, sickness. And it works a bit like a virus. You get infected, it attaches to something in you that feels bad, like life isn't going the way that I thought it was supposed to. The promise that my nation made to me is not being fulfilled. Somebody's to be blamed for this, I suppose. We have these forever wars off in the Middle East because of our corrupt politicians who for the last who knows how long, but certainly 5 years, have been lying to us visibly with tremendous lies. It's very hard to trust anyone. It's hard to buy a home, or things are getting more expensive. So you have this kind of downward mobility, this sense that the promise that we were kind of raised with is not there. And then there's the propaganda. Then there's the propaganda that fills into this space, and that's a sensitivity. That's an opening for the mind virus to come into, and this propaganda relentlessly. You had October 7th, and then there's October 8th. It could almost just be its own word. There's a way that you say October 7th. It's striking, by the way. We all know. You never have to say which year you mean. You say October 7th. Everybody knows which October 7th, even though there's an October 7th every year, and there will be one every year. There's one October 7th. Now, October 8th, there's one October 8th. And that's when the worldwide propaganda campaign, not on just one side, but on both sides, began. And this propaganda campaign said, you know what? All these problems that you're having in your life, you're Americans, let's say it's US Americans, it's hard to buy a house. Apparently, dating's tough, so the Jews probably did that too. There's an explanation for that, and part of that explanation, it's easy to say it's the Jews, but no, it's Israel. Okay, so and this is very interesting. Israel, you could say, oh, their location in the world, they're upsetting the balance, it's starting the wars. This is the kind of propaganda, right? It's all very technical baloney. But what's happening is, in the 20th century, 85 to 100 years ago, and before, for centuries before that, there was this thing that possessed Europe called the Jewish question. Karl Marx famously wrote about the Jewish question, and the question boils down in its kind of nicest form to what do we do with the Jews, right? What do we do with them? Which implies we don't really want them, but what do we do with them? And so people have sought different answers. Karl Marx's answer was, of course, well, we just make them not Jewish. There's no Jewish problem if we just get rid of their Jewishness. It wasn't necessarily the people, it was the fact that they were Jewish. So we solved that problem by making them not Jewish, and they can become communists, and that would fix that. Okay, and then there have been other worse answers to this question, as we had in remembrance yesterday. And so that, since World War II, since the Holocaust, is not palatable to Western receptors, to stick with this mind virus motif. You can't bring it up, but if somebody says, all your problems are probably down to the Jews, you can get away with it in some corners. It's acceptable, or it works. I don't want to say acceptable like it's okay. It works in some corners, but primarily it doesn't. But you can say, oh, I'm just criticizing the government of Israel and its actions as a state. So instead of the Jewish question, which is what do we do with the Jews in Europe, we have the Israel question, which is what do we do with Israel in the world? But it's the same damn question. It's the same damn question. It just hides behind this veneer of acceptable criticism of politics. Of course, it's acceptable to criticize a state, whether you're a member of that state or not. Of course, it's acceptable to criticize or like or hate or whatever a politician, whether it's Prime Minister Netanyahu or Donald Trump or, God forbid, Kamala Harris. You're allowed to do this. And so they can hide the Jewish question and the Israel question behind this falsely safe, appropriate, even a responsible thing. It's a responsible thing to do, to ask the question, oh, well, yes, well, the existence of Israel is causing all these problems. What do we do about it? And then what happens is you get that hook in your mouth, and the next thing it's I can't get a date because they're Jews. I can't buy a house because we give $3.8 billion to the Jews. I mean, Israel. And the Jewish question reappears out of the Israel question because it's the same question and it can't hide. And what's happened is this madness after starting October 8th targeted American youth on both sides. We saw what happened on the campuses with the left. But what we weren't paying as close attention to is what was happening in audiences of influencers and streamers on the right. And the madness spread there as well, just a different set of reasons for blaming the Jews for everything again.
Got it. So one term seems to come up again and again in this public debate, and I mean, of course, the term woke or wokeism. So my question is, how do you define the term, and what do you make like with conservatives who insist that the woke virus is purely a problem of the left?
Well, you're in for a long night. How do I define woke? I mean, I think the hard part about this is there are very simple answers that I can give in a handful of words, where all of those words are philosophical words that then have to be explained. It's people who favor critical theory. That's it. It's people who woke up to a belief in a systemic power structure that alienates them from their full existence and inheritance in society. That's it. It's this belief that people like me should have had more in society, but because of powerful systems, I can't have what I'm supposed to have, this entitlement that I have to my society. And there's a lot of ways that we could get it into this kind of philosophical weeds. Another philosophical weed that I threw out at the Shikli conference for that dignified audience yesterday was that it boils down to a politic of friend and enemy, a very toxic belief. It's not that there are enemies in the world. Obviously, there are enemies in the world, and no country in the world needs to be told that less than Israel. But when you orient your entire framework as there are those of us who believe exactly the small, tiny right thing that is the only right way to think, and everyone else is a hostile threat or an enemy, or when you believe that that the state has the authority to declare the enemy, and then once that has been declared, everyone who doesn't join the state in attacking the enemy is also an enemy. This politic of friend and enemy is woke. But it is ultimately, I think there's no way to say it except for at least two kind of technical things. One is that it is a feeling of alienation, that your society, some collective within your society at least, was owed something that they have been alienated from. And you learn to identify your troubles with the alienation of that group. That's what you wake up to. That the people who are successful in the world are successful because of some corrupt system, and you should have more than you do, and you don't because of them. And there's your friend and enemy. And then the second is also kind of derivative to that, is that they control how we think so that we can't even criticize them properly. So therefore, things that they don't want us to know, which the technical term is subjugated knowledges.
Wow.
Yeah. Things that they don't want you to know because it would threaten their power are more likely to be true because they don't want you to know them. That's woke thinking. And by the way, with the just asking questions BS, that's what that is. Outsider knowledge that challenges the existing system is superior to the established knowledge of the system because it challenges what is seen to be inherently illegitimate. And you know, I didn't say it's the Jews. I'm just asking questions. That's the same logic. This is what it means to be woke. But Karl Marx, just to be technical one more time, said something. Now that I've introduced this idea of alienation and that you're a member of a group that has been alienated and therefore you don't have what you have, Karl Marx said that there is the supersession. In other words, elevating yourself beyond yourself to something bigger. So connecting to something bigger by the retraction of alienation into the self. So you learn to identify yourself with this unfair alienation, and you think it gives you greater standing to connect to a movement or a whole that then operates on all of this evil politics. And that's a very technical definition, but you'll notice at no point that I have to say anything about being oriented to the left oriented to the right, or oriented with any particular political or religious persuasion whatsoever, to give that definition.
Got it. That clarifies a lot. So let's talk about conservatism. Okay, we are a bunch of conservatives sitting in the room. So what is your definition for American conservatism?
I mean, you follow somebody like Edmund Burke or something, obviously that the idea of conservatism can, the sad thing about the philosophy of conservatism, it can be boiled down to a very American phrase: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You don't really need more than that to outline the entire kind of philosophical school, which makes a lot of it difficult to write about because you can say it in a very quaint sentence. But with Edmund Burke as kind of the philosophical father of conservatism, where is Edmund Burke as this arch-conservative character in history? He's located in the English liberal tradition that then gets handed off and modified and clarified and developed into an American system firmly rooted on this weird idea of common sense and a little bit of pragmatism, and this is uniquely American expression of English liberalism. But the point is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So what you do is you make incremental changes rather than radical changes. You don't try to throw out the entire bathtub. You try to save the baby from the bathwater. You respect tradition and realize that tradition is this history of people trying things, some of which worked and some of which didn't. And therefore, even if you don't know why that tradition is necessary or valuable, you respect that it's there because it has been contributing to a system that has worked over time. You don't have to be locked to it. But in the American tradition, it means conserving the American tradition, which is to have this kind of covenantal relationship with this idea that we can govern ourselves, and by doing so, we might receive the blessings of liberty. That's a very covenantal idea. You know, there's this controversy. Is America a propositional nation, or is it a people in a place, on a land, and a blood and a soil? Well, turns out it's more of a covenant of a nation. It's that if we accept the responsibility of governing ourselves morally and practically, taking care of our own affairs, if we accept our end of the responsibility, keep our end of the covenant, then the blessings of liberty can be trusted to come. No guarantee, but they can be trusted. And if you don't understand the parallel and what Israel therefore has to teach Americans about their own founding, then, you know, I'm in the wrong country.
Amazing. Is there some kind of a religious split or divergence, like between Catholics and Protestants inside the American right?
I'll kind of answer this as a mathematician so that I lose the entire audience. You have in mathematics, when you have a very complicated function that you don't know how to describe, you can answer according to creating more and more sophisticated approximations. By how many terms that you add to the approximation, you'll get a better and better approximation. So if you have what's called a first order approximation, I won't overcomplicate you and confuse you. You have one term. The reality is you have two. You have one term if you have a first order approximation, two if you have a second order approximation, three, and each one adds nuance. To a first order approximation, a little bit, yes. Evangelical Christians, by and large, are very pro-Israel, are very pro-Jewish people. You could say philo-Semitic if you like this kind of terminology. I don't know what the best way to say it is. They're friends of the Jews. They are friends of the state of Israel. They are supporters, and they are so genuinely. And we're talking about worldwide, not just in America, 700 million people. In America, they are a third of the adult population. They are the largest single kind of political bloc defined in some way in the country. So Catholics, on the other hand, sometimes go the other way. And I say this very carefully. For the very first appearances, yeah, Catholics are going woke right. But that's totally unfair to Catholics. And I don't want to be unfair to Catholics in any way whatsoever, because it's not Catholics that are going woke right. There is a political and economic philosophy within Catholicism that arose at the end of the 19th century. It's not like it goes back to Augustine or even Aquinas. It arose under, awkwardly, Pope Leo XIII, who might have a successor in the papacy now. Under Pope Leo XIII arose this philosophy called integralism. This is unique to Catholicism, or it's supposed to be, and the integralists, all well, not really, almost all integralists are Catholic, but most Catholics are not integralists, believe in this doctrine from the late 19th century of reintegrating church and state and economy into a single object. Integrate, integral, integralism. That's the root of the word. And this philosophy is very bent toward the woke right. Their attitudes actually specifically toward Jews in Israel do vary. I don't want to be unfair to anybody. These are very serious charges and concerns, but they are by and large woke right. And they have a weird Protestant group, which is a subsection of a very particular strain. They're called Reformed Christians. Not all of them, in fact, not even most of them, but a small subsection of the Reformed Protestant Christians have decided to join their so-called trad-cath brethren in trying to become integralist, in favoring a replacement theology where when Jesus went and died on the cross and was said to have resurrected, that he established a church, and that church became Israel, and they are the Israel that is referenced throughout the Torah, and the Jews no longer. And I don't understand why any Protestants have done this, but some have. So it's a minority faction of Catholics and a smaller minority faction of Protestants, which gives this bad illusion, especially since there are so many evangelical Christians who are Protestants who are such strong friends and supporters of Jews in Israel. But there's this bad philosophical economic doctrine, or political and economic doctrine, in my opinion, called integralism, that is most of the source of that problem. And to blame Catholics or to blame Protestants or to rescue Protestants in entirety is to miss this absolutely crucial distinction that there is a specific philosophy that not everybody subscribes to that is more of the center of the problem.
That's a thoughtful answer. Let's talk now. I know it's not your main field, but let's talk a bit about foreign policy and a little bit economics. So,
shorter answers now.
What's your take about Trump's agenda in the foreign affairs, and specifically on the economy? Talk a little bit about tariffs and the backlash against globalization.
Okay, yeah, a little bit is all I can talk about. And so I don't like the tariffs personally. I'm very skeptical. I'm very nervous of them. I haven't found very many economists who support this program. There are arguments that in some ways it's being implemented in getting successes or wins, but in other ways it is not. It's very difficult. This is of course not also my field, so I'm watching kind of as a horrified layperson. But at the same time, I have to admit that it's very difficult, very unwise, maybe imprudent to bet against Donald Trump when he has some long-term vision that he wants to implement. So maybe there's some grand strategy. I don't mean to sound like the QAnon, but maybe trust the plan. I don't know. But I'm nervous. So I'm hesitant to be a full-throated defender of this. You won't find me coming out and being an apologist for it. I am a light critic of these policies, but my modesty in my criticism is largely a function of my ignorance. Contrary to what they say about me on the internet, I don't really talk about things much that I don't know much about, and this is sort of beyond my ken.
Okay, so looking ahead, how is the post-Trump era going to look like? And do we need to be afraid or suspicious about J.D. Vance?
So this is the first question all over again. Okay, what the heck? Well, no, the personal one, but what the heck is going on the American right? What's happening on the American right, let me answer the question a second time, is there is a power struggle and an ideological struggle for what the American conservative movement and or MAGA, they're not quite the same thing, but they overlap overwhelmingly. What do those look like in an era where Trump is no longer eligible to be in the White House? Again, post-Trump era is easy to say politically, but it's hard to believe the man will have no significant influence after he leaves office. There may never be a post-Trump era again. I don't know. But at any rate, there is a struggle for when he's no longer eligible to be president, he's taken off of the presidential table, that the Republican Party, the conservative movement, and MAGA sort of as three very closely overlapping objects are fighting about what direction to go. One of those directions is kind of this, there's probably 5 or 6, but I don't want to overcomplicate things. One of these is this rhino thing that the Republicans in name only that everybody's mad about. It doesn't actually refer to an animal in Africa. It's Republicans in name only, rhino. And so these guys, are these, kind of Bush doctrine largely. I don't want to tie Reagan up by using words like neoconservative. These are these Bush doctrine conservatives, and they're not very popular. They're not very trusted, and I strongly hope they don't win this power struggle, but I think they are waiting in the wings for an opportunity. Then you have the MAGA, which is a somewhat populist, but very America-loving, pro-America, let's pick it up and wave it, American flag contingent that wants to figure out how to continue their movement absent the possibility of their leader, who is Donald Trump, being in the White House again. And then you have this, frankly, post-liberal movement, most of which, or maybe all of which, is something we could describe as woke right. Certainly most of it is woke right, that actually is deeply suspicious of the American constitutional order, our foreign policy arrangement, and our standing in the world since World War II, what they call the post-war liberal consensus, where we make very poor decisions, in their opinion, about how conservatism can go forward in the hopes of some mythology of never again, which isn't to say that they want a second Holocaust or anything, but they're skeptical of a social mythology that has come out on the back of that noble concept. And these people are the radicals. They want to upset the apple cart. And for the last year, they've been rapidly ascendant to many people's horror. Jews in particular noticing it's terrifying. And so I don't know who's going to win. But I do think that the post-liberals have largely, first of all, they're smaller in number than they appear, and they've largely freaked people out, and now they've been sort of exposed to the public very early on. 3 months ago when I was here, I could say the word post-liberal and everybody would go cross-eyed, and now people are kind of aware that this is a thing. What we're going to leave the Constitution behind? We're going to leave the Constitution behind? No. And so something has changed. So I don't know that there's going to continue to be ascendant. Now here's the question. What about J.D. Vance? I don't know, but he said openly that he's post-liberal repeatedly. He's openly called himself a member of this new right contingent repeatedly. He aligned himself in saying so at least one time with the author Patrick Deneen, who is one of the leaders of the post-liberal movement, who's written a book called Regime Change and another one, Why Liberalism Failed. And the Regime Change book explicitly calls for overthrowing the American order for a new one that's very monarchical, and it has an aristocracy of all things kind of woven in intentionally. Don't worry, it'll be safe because the people that will be involved are virtuous. No clarity on what that means, but I'm sure we can trust them. They've acted that way so far. And in fact, Vice President Vance, who I got mistaken for in the shook last night, by the way, I was wearing a suit. If you get the opportunity to wear a suit to the shook, I recommend it. It's a lot of fun. More fun than you suspect. Well, J.D. Vance was sitting at an event with Patrick Deneen. Patrick Deneen stood at the podium, it's not there anymore that I point at it, for 30 minutes talking about this exact book. J.D. Vance, as Senator Vance at the time in 2023, articulates immediately that he agrees with this book. He agrees with Patrick Deneen, that he sees himself as this member of this post-liberal new right. And that, for me, is not just concerning, but disqualifying. That's my opinion. Other people's mileage may vary. Their opinions may vary. Again, kilometers may vary. I don't know.
Okay, thank
We're
you.
in a metric country, socialists.
Okay. Thank you. So before moving to the fun part, short question. Your predictions for the midterms.
Yeah, that's a real short one. I've been actually, I'm very cautiously hopeful again, because I feel like this woke right has exposed itself too soon, which was sort of my strategy in fighting them as hard as I have been for the last 15 very unpleasant months, was to kind of, I knew they were going to just barrel forward. The question was, could I get them to the point of constantly doubling down past the point of no return, and then eventually to absurdity, or help them get there themselves is a better way to phrase that, by calling them woke right, 35 or 40 times a day, every single day, until they did what I needed them to do, which was to show their true face and render themselves horrifying and absurd, like woke things always are. And That's happened very early in an American election cycle. This didn't happen in September with the election in November. This happened in anywhere as arguably last September through this month in January. Somewhere in this window, the things have been changing very quickly. As I flew home from Israel last time, Tucker Carlson had his infamous interview with Nick Fuentes, this wretched character. Charlie Kirk called, my friend Charlie, by the way, called him vermin, I think not incorrectly. This interview comes out, and then the Heritage Foundation decides to, it's a funny story, I won't tell it tonight, but it decides to protect him, Tucker, after this interview. And suddenly the conservative movement in America realized, oh my God, this isn't on the internet, it's institutional, we've got to do something, the house is on fire. And that might have actually saved the world. I'm not entirely sure. So I'm a little bit cautiously hopeful, but I honestly am very afraid that the Republicans have not been serious enough in this. They've not been serious enough on some other things, that the economy is so shaky that they might be in for a historic walloping that, to be honest, they kind of richly deserve, but that I do not want them to get. I sincerely hope they do not get it. So sorry, toss up, don't know.
Great. Okay, so let's turn now to the audience. We will be happily take questions, not speeches. So the mic is here. Oh, yeah.
Hi, thanks for coming, Vice President Vance. So you said two things. There are two questions, but it's really one question. You talked about sort of the friend-enemy distinction, and you also talked about if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And my question is, I guess, a sanity check for both. If you could give us maybe a sanity check, how do we know when we're facing real enemies and when we're facing, friend-enemy distinction, weird enemies? And also, how do we know when something is broken that we need to fix?
Right. Okay. Those are good questions, right? Those are very, very good questions. They're actually very hard questions to answer in practice in many cases. The best acid test or litmus test that you can have for how you know if you're dealing with actual friends and actual enemies versus political contrivance of friend and enemy. First of all, let me just give you a parallel idea to the friend-enemy distinction that'll make it a little more visceral for you, since you're conservatives and you'll follow me. The friend-enemy distinction, the friends are trans allies and the enemies are transphobic bigots, and there's nothing in between. So if it has that feeling to it, you're probably dealing with a friend-enemy distinction. But the better litmus test is that if there's literally not missiles pointed at you, which is pointing here, if there's not literally a war, and the demand, if there's literally a war, you're in a different situation, which is called war. If there's not literally a war, and the demand is that that guy is enemy, and if you don't agree with me, now you're my enemy, that's the problem. That's the best simple acid test, first order test to tell if you're dealing with it. Now, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is, I think, very hard. I think that all traditions, it's always the possibility that a tradition's arbitrary, that it's not actually even beneficial, or that some of them maybe have gone obsolete. It's always possible. And so there has to be enough openness and tolerance in society to test, but there also has to be enough humility to recognize when the test has gone badly on the one hand, and humility to recognize when the test has gone well, if that's what happens on the other. But the best way, actually, as much as you don't want to hear it, is that the best way to find out if it wasn't broke, so don't fix it, is to have at least some people try and see what happens. It's go ahead and touch the stove, kids, see how it works out. Sometimes you got to let them. But the fact is that all along, it's the role of conservatives, and especially I think, religious conservatives, believing conservatives, it's a role to make the advisement of why this is unwise. Sure, test your luck, but it's unwise. And to articulate, if you understand this tradition, why you have this tradition, listen, maybe you don't understand it, you're 17 years old or whatever, you don't understand it, and just use the very simple, adolescent example because it's very common there. You don't understand it yet, but this tradition has this value, that value, this is what it brings to the table, and articulating that, making the tradition itself inspiring and meaningful on its own terms, so that when the test of the tradition comes, they're more likely to recognize the failure and to come to their senses in some sense sooner. But I'm pretty open to experimenting on the edges and testing, but also to appealing to the, as Edmund Burke would have it, true epistemic force of tradition, to take that wisdom under advisement and to have mentors that are older advising in that way. But the test for that one is to test it and see without letting yourself go, too far, too fast.
That was a great summary of conservatism.
Hi, James. Thank you for coming. Amazing. One little thing I wanted to say, that your assessment and the term of woke right, I didn't like it at the start because I felt it's something from the left. Then I heard your explanation, and that's made perfect sense. And why it's also made perfect sense? Because it drives them crazy. Truly, I never saw something. It's like you hit the nerve exactly where it hurts. My question would be regarding Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, and the company. I'm not talking about Nick Fuentes. This is some subculture niche. What is about? It is not evolution. Their new selves about Islam is good, Qatar is perfect, Israel is the devil. It's as if it's an agenda that were turned on very quickly. And you clearly see people that as if they subscribe to it, as if they joined the club. What is that club? It's something genuine ideological, or it's a political interest, because it's not genuine. It doesn't feel genuine, and it doesn't feel like people went through some thought process and came to something. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's fake news. I think it's, in fact, what more accurately would be called agitprop or agitation propaganda. And I believe it is deliberate. I don't have hard evidence that these characters are doing these things, paid or for whatever reason. So I can't make any such claims or accusations. But I agree with you. It feels that way. I think that's correct. I do not think it's organic. I think it was pressed upon us. That's why I said October 8th can become its own symbol, that this is when a global propaganda push began. And it was propaganda meant to agitate. But so what is this then? I mean, there's lots of things, but there's a concept that you should know that's called reflexivity. This is a very fancy word, and it comes from a bad guy. This bad guy's name is George Soros. He outlines this in his book, The Alchemy of Finance. And basically, since the late 1980s, pretty much everything that's propagandist, and the CCP included, operate off of this, what he calls a dialectic of reflexivity. And the point with the reflexive campaign is that you want it to have this quality that it seems like everybody's believing it now all at the same time, and that it would be missing the wave or getting the energy wrong or whatever to disagree with it. I don't want to go into the whole details of how he outlines that reflexivity works, but the idea is that it's the thing everybody's doing right now. It's where all the energy is. You hear this from these woke right podcasters. What did Konstantin Kisin call them? Very rightly, very appropriate, podcastistan, that they all echo each other. They all say it over and over again. And they all say that this is where the youth are going, right? This is a very reflexive thing. The youth weren't going there when they started saying it, but they can make the youth believe that's where the youth are going. So that's where the youth are going, and that's where the people who want the youth dollars are going to follow. And those are where all the people, there's a big crisis, I think, of a middle age, or what do they call it, a midlife crisis happening with a lot of these podcastistan guys. They're hitting their late 30s, they're hitting their early 40s. The Gen Z are like, shut up, boomer, you're old. And they're like, I don't want to be old, I want to be cool. Where are the kids going? Oh yeah, the Jews. And I think this is a real piece of the reflexive energy, but the orchestrators, the instigators of the reflexive movement are disingenuous, bad actors who are doing it on purpose for reasons that if I had evidence, I would be thrilled to present to you, because I suspect it too, but don't have it. And I do think this was a coordinated propaganda push that we expected from the left and did not expect from the right, so it caught us unawares, that was designed to drag right-wing young men in this direction before they even knew what would happen, because it's the thing all the people their age are doing, and it took them pretty far, the hook in the mouth, and it set and it pulled them. And then the whole energy creates its own kind of momentum. And I think that that's actually the explanation for the way the dynamic played out. But like I said, the instigators are deliberate actors, and I hope they can be identified properly for that and held to account as is deserving, even if that turns out to be treason and they have to deal with that.
Hi, James. Hi, James. I listened to your podcast about what is American. I enjoyed it very much. Thankfully, in Israel, we don't have the question what is an Israeli. It's very much known. But in America, the term changed a lot throughout the years. And the creed, from the creed in the Constitution and until now, legally, it's changed a lot of times. How do you cement what is an American for time to come without people being able to take advantage of it and push it to something else that it never was?
It turns out that our founders in the United States understood this idea very well. Benjamin Franklin, for example, is a very famous vignette. When Benjamin Franklin came out from the Constitutional Convention, he was asked, "What kind of government did you give us?" And he said to the lady, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." And so the way that we have to do this is that we have to guard it in the same way, actually, that Jewish people have to guard their traditions and what they mean and how they relate to what it means to be Jewish. We have to what it means, in my opinion, as an American in particular. I think it's a very sacred thing to be an American, and it's up to the people who understand it and believe it to articulate that and to defend it. But this is a process that has to happen continually. There is no way to safeguard it so that it can't be taken or hijacked or misdirected. It's like if I don't want to do it because I'm tired enough that I'll probably break something. But if I picked up this bottle upside down, good thing that was a cap on it, right? And put it on the palm of my hand and tried to balance it, it wants to tip over. It wants to fall into the wrong definitions in the analogy. And the only way I can keep it up is to constantly move my hand under it. Right, constantly. I can never stop moving my hand. I never get to this Zen perfect stillness. And that's how these things work. That's how these identities are protected, is that as the culture goes this way or that, or the agitating propagandists come in and the reflexive campaign takes off, the people who carry the memory move the hand, adjust, not move the definition, but keep the definition upright and get it under the people as they shift around with the winds of time and circumstance. And I think that requires people to be interested in it, to study it deeply, to love it, and to articulate it like they love it, which includes defending it and defending others who defend it, and to intervene when they see it being despoiled. But it's an ongoing project. There is no protecting it. There's only returning to it to understand it better and to articulate it and share it. It's like it's almost like if you, so last time I was here, I didn't do this time. I went to one of the tombs on, I think, Mount of Olives or something, and they gave us little candles to hold to walk around, and the breeze of us walking kept blowing the candle out, right? And so the question is a little bit like, how do you keep the candle lit? Well, if I move and my candle goes out, I reach over to somebody who can bring my light back onto the candle. And that process has to happen. People have to keep at least one candle lit, and they have to share that light, and they have to keep, the best way to do that is to get as many candles lit as possible, so that if 10 go out, you're not lost. You still have others to get the light going again. But the answer is, how do you keep the candle lit? And it turns out I don't know what kind of candles they were using. I blame the Jews. I don't know. But they went out really easily. But I think it's a good metaphor, and I don't really blame the Jews. It was a Christian thing, as it turns out. And so it takes work, and it takes community, and it takes effort, and it takes looking into and articulating these things, and sharing these things, and believing in these things. But that also takes being willing to look back to the source and to say, well, what does this really say? What did this really mean? And to have the constant debates about what was meant in these documents written by men who are not here any longer to defend those things that they said and that they wrote, and so that we are left with the more challenging job of, doing the Talmud about them, I guess.
Thank you so much for your talk and for really bringing the woke right to everybody's attention. This is such an important thing. And your comments about reflexivity and how that merges with the left with the woke left is I think is very important. One of the things that seems common to them, to these two movements, is a kind of a hatred of tradition, a hatred of what America used to stand for and what the Western world used to stand for. And this is something that Sir Roger Scruton discussed in his work on okophobia. And I wonder if you can, share some thoughts about what are the forces that are driving people in the West towards this self-hatred that is really, I think, at the center of these terrible new political movements.
Just clarify what is oikophobia for the audience.
You can do that.
Oikophobia, yeah. Fear from home, yeah.
Okay, now everybody's good. I'm not going to talk about that anyway. Okay. It's a fear of the moon?
No, a genuine fear from our tradition,
Oh, yeah.
our land.
Okay. So, the reason of this kind of, I guess, self-hatred, if you want to phrase it that way, is despair. It's what the young people call the black pill. They see that the promise that they've been given, that they believe maybe was a covenantal relationship, isn't actually returning, that the trust isn't there, that it'd be great to go back to Egypt and have their cucumbers because their faith is weak and it's lost, and we know how that story ends, so maybe they should wise up, but especially if they're religious conservatives and recognize the relevance of the story. But I think that that's where it comes from. That's the easier question, but there's a more interesting thing to actually talk about here, which is that this manifests differently on the woke left and the woke right. The woke left is actually reflexively hostile to tradition. They actually are anti-traditional in virtually every regard. I would take that as actually partly what defines them as being left, is that they have a hostile attitude toward tradition, an anti-traditionalist. In fact, break the traditions on purpose to break free of the grip they have on your life as kind of a disposition or a mentality. But the woke right does not have that. They, in fact, have something more insidious and more subtle, and that's very important for us to understand. It's very easy to understand that if it's a tradition, it sucks. That's the left. So let's do something different, or the opposite, in fact. But on the right, it's much more subtle. On the right, they have lost faith in the tradition as it actually is, and therefore, because they claim to be traditional, and on the right, they claim to favor tradition, they claim to need tradition, they are, to be very technical, pseudo-traditional. They create false traditions that everybody's supposed to cleave to in order to bind together around a new mentality while still pretending to be the conservers of tradition. So that way they look conservative, but what they're conserving is a forgery. It is a hoax in some sense. And you see this, just to make it very clear, you see this vividly, with the Nazis. The Nazis reacting to the incursion of Marxism, we'll just make it very political, or reacting to the incursion of Marxism, the weakness of the liberal government under the Weimar Republic, preventing this, and the destruction of their traditions and of their Germanness, however the folkish Germanish, we don't have to get into the whole details. They see this as a problem, and rather than saying that they're going to be German, they create an entire mythological history of Germany that's not even real, a pseudo-tradition that everybody is now going to see themselves as, that includes their Aryan race ideology at its core. And so they created not a return to tradition, but an abandonment of tradition for a gratifying myth that feels traditional. And that's a very important distinction. And it's very difficult when we deal with the woke right, because it looks like and it feels like, and they will convince people that they are appealing to tradition, but not only are they actually ignorant of the reality of the tradition, they're hostile to the reality of the tradition and want to substitute a new pattern that just so happens to define them as, what was the word, virtuous, and the rightful bearers of the torch for the next generation of society.
Do you think the woke right is more of like openly anti-Semitic, like Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson, or they're going like the leftist route? They use things like Israel and Zionism, the IDF, to hide behind the like anti-Semitism.
They hide it, but worse. They don't try to hide. The woke right doesn't try to hide what they're doing. This has been a very frustrating part of being the guy against the woke right. They do have philosophy, believe it or not, but they don't care about it. So you can't really, you feel obligated, and you're in my position, as I've done with the left and studied their philosophy kind of deeply, which is weird. You know, if God's looking, he's laughing. It's such a waste of time. You don't want to know these things, but you have to stop them. But with the right, they have this philosophy, but they don't even care about their own philosophy. It's just this book they can kind of point to, this list of books they can point to say, this is why we want to take all the power. The difference is, for example, until you get somebody like a Lenin or a Mao saying dictatorship of the proletariat, you'll never find one of these woke leftists saying what we want is a dictator. They say all this baloney about how we need a new government body that will protect the people from racism by being able to adjudicate it. They'll never come out and say it. What the right does, the right's like, oh, we have a problem. We need Franco. And you're like, okay, you know, it's that old thing where when President Trump was in office the first time, something happened. I don't remember the story, but some journalist complained. He said, I worked 3 years on this story, and then he just tweets it out. And the woke right's like that. They just tell you, we want power, we want to order your lives for you. So they're a little bit more direct. But this translates over with this Israel question to Jewish question crossover, is that they're just not that good at being subtle. So, you know, Tucker Carlson plays it very well. Oh, it's Israel. Oh, criticizing your government. What if it is an ally? And, you know, whatever. And he plays it a little subtle because he's sophisticated. But then the guy that is listening to him is like, I can't buy a house because of the Jews. And you know, or whatever other thing. It doesn't even have to be a blame the Jews. It just hate the Jews. And so there's a lack of subtlety to reaction in general. They're much more force-oriented than trickery-oriented. They're less deceptive, although they're somewhat deceptive, and much more blunt about what they want, which in times of stress, by the way, is appealing. When you're being beleaguered by Marxists who are deceiving you and undermining your institutions, and you feel your society slipping away, it feels great to have, you know what? I can fix it because there's a problem and I can fix him. That feels satisfying when everything feels upside down and confusing. And so they're much more blunt. It's a different approach. It's qualitatively different. I can address your problem and fix it kind of attitude. So they are much less subtle on the IQ to JQ, Israel question to Jewish question, subtlety, conversion. The left is better at this trick.
Hi, James. I'm part of Siach Boer, which is an Israeli conservative youth movement.
Get closer.
As we try to shape the conversations in Israel and the political sphere from the bottom up, how do you think we could avoid the process of woke right from happening here?
I mean, it's the same kind of answer I gave before. You've got to be, honestly, you've always got to be vigilant. You've got to do honest readings of the texts that you're looking at. You've got to be clear on the values. A lot of the texts that you might encounter, there are texts and then there are seductive texts. Books of witchcraft would be a Middle Ages way of phrasing this, or grimoires, that pull you into an ideological framework as you read them. And if you don't have, and it's funny because the right word is, if you don't have a good basis, so if you're not based, when you approach that book, it might pull you in and mislead you. A simple way, though, is actually, you know, I've had the good fortune this trip of learning a little bit about this organization from Rafi, and the fact that as long as debate is sort of central on the table, you're very unlikely to get caught into this kind of transgressive cult or this kind of, you know, consensus-based view of reality that kind of defines woke thinking. So as long as you keep an emphasis on debate, I think you're likely to stay quite safe. But you also need to approach texts that you know are likely to be seductive philosophical texts, revolutionary literature, counter-revolutionary literature. I don't have to tell you, you know, Islamist literature, which, by the way, when you read it the first time, if you're not prepared for it, it feels very seductive. It says, wow, this is a really concrete way to understand life. It's very simple. This feels good. And so it's seductive. It pulls you in. So you have to be clear when you approach that kind of revolutionary, counter-revolutionary text that what you're reading is something that's trying to seduce you into that way of thinking. It's not merely presenting ideas. The ideas themselves have an agenda. And so you have to read it differently. You have to read it with a more maturity. You have to read it after you have a basis and firm principle. But as a I know it's a youth-oriented movement, so at a very first level, the first principle has to be willingness to debate the ideas, to discuss, and to not profess to know all of the answers. And to be willing to actually take responsibility for when, you know, you've gone wrong or you've got caught up in, you know, you get these, you read ideas, you're like, oh my gosh, this is it, I've needed it, and you go off on like ideological fervor, and that's cool, like, but help each other back, you know. And so I think the simple answer is the debate, but also recognize and practice recognizing the difference between texts that are meant to pull you into a radical ideology and texts that are meant to articulate basic principles, and read them differently. Learn to read them differently. I think it matters a lot.
Did you notice there are no Israeli groypers?
Not even one.
Hi, James. Given the history of the Jewish people and the rise of anti-Semitism on the right and the left in the US, can you envision a situation in the near future where the United States would become too dangerous for the Jews to live in? And what would it take, what kind of a change would it take in the US for that to become a reality?
I can envision it, actually, yes, I can. And that's why I've dedicated most of this year to reading for audiences that would be generally unlikely to have read it or unfamiliar. Wonderful books that most people don't ever want to read, much less dare to read, like Mein Kampf. I've spent a lot of time this year articulating the contents of that book so that people realize some of the ideas that they're meeting match the same reflexive narratives that Adolf Hitler used to whip up a beleaguered German people after the First World War, and so that we don't invite ourselves to make those same mistakes. I find it unlikely that a repeat of the Nazi circumstance can happen in America without some very radical changes. The structure of the German parliament was considerably different than the structure of the United States. Their constitution was very weak in comparison to what the US Constitution has in this way. It's not possible for some, you know, minority party representative in the U.S. House to pull a technical rule and get voted as from chancellor to Führer and take over the government as a dictator and rewrite the laws. It's going to be very difficult without radical changes to the U.S. situation, but that's not my biggest concern. I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's not actually my concern when I obviously repeat frequently that never again is always and never again that therefore is now. What my concern is that the danger would come from ideologically whipped up bands of people. And you said the left and the right, and you left out the Muslim Brotherhood. They're there. That's a real threat. They're there. They're expanding. They're running the silent jihad, and they're there. And that's a genuine danger to Jews. A genuine danger, even in the United States. As we saw just in Bondi Beach in Australia, that's a surprise. It can come out of nowhere, and you see a massacre, right? And we've had these murders in the U.S. already, and we've seen a synagogue burned down in Mississippi just a week or so ago. And so it's entirely possible that not lone wolves, but actually coordinated cells, like what we see actually happening on the left in Minnesota fighting the immigration officers. I'm just talking about their level of coordination. I disagree with their politics completely, obviously, but somebody might not. It's the level of coordination that could actually arise in these right-wing circles as well to target Jews and create a very dangerous situation. And just like the standoff with the government, it's not clear that we can trust our government to be able to deal with that in the way that it needs to be dealt with in order to keep Jews safe. So I can envision a situation. I don't feel like that's the situation now, and I would be desperately sad to lose our American Jewish population, even a small fraction of them, because I think they're a genuine credit and gift to our country. I think it's amazing that half of the world's Jews have chosen to live there, or nearly half. I understand it. It's not quite. It's 40-something%, but it's significant. But it's a dicey situation. Some of the people over here in Israel, I think they actually go further. They're friends of mine. Some of the MKs even have said, you know, well, it may be time to make Aliyah because there's no IDF in the U.S. to protect you. And I think that goes further than the reality. But there is a situational awareness in a circumstance now, and there are ways to envision it getting completely out of hand. Not to the degree, I don't think, at all that the Nazis were able to end up perpetrating outside of, again, some radical departure. I think the war would have to start first and radically reshape the U.S. rather than the other way around for something like that to be the case. But it's a scary and dangerous situation. This is why I'm so dedicated to fighting this problem, both here, which is not my home, and there, which is my home, where I care proportionally more for the obvious reason. And it's not just because we don't have an IDF, but if we did, this would be less scary. So yes, it's a possibility, but is it a clear and present imminent threat? No. And I think this is why it's so important for us to take this time that we have now to make this articulation, to fight back this rising scourge. If it has to be somewhere in the U.S., let's let it be on the left and not let it be, but let no conservative should stand for this in our movement is what I'm trying to say. We should purge this from our side. It doesn't represent any respectable value whatsoever. So it is something we have to take seriously. I don't say never again is now as a brand. I'm really concerned. And I'm not as concerned about your country as I am about mine. But on the other hand, I would rather we get way ahead of this and make sure that I maybe look like a fool who was just running a brand, and that it's never a truly serious concern to where the kind of spirit of your question is reflected. So sadly, yes. But then again, that's technically always the case. I think it's stupid to go to sleep and think that that could never, ever be. That's a dangerous error too.
Hi, you can hear me? Yeah. I'm a big fan of Charlie. The day he got murdered, I cried all night and didn't go to work. Do you have any story to share about him? Maybe a positive one? Thank you.
I have a lot of stories about Charlie. The night Charlie was murdered, I wrote something. I posted it on X, and then somebody asked me to repost it on my website as an article on New Discourses, so I did. And edited it a little bit to make it better. So I told a story in that, and the point of what I wrote was that in that moment when emotions were so high, not just grief and sadness and shock and horror, but anger. Anger is dangerous. Anger, fury, people possibly losing their heads and doing something, not in the immediate moment. I didn't think there would be some immediate pouring out into the street with violence, not with conservatives. I was afraid that it could possibly become this inspiration to this essentially hate-driven, anger-driven movement seeking emotional release or catharsis. So I wrote this short piece called Catharsis, civilization or catharsis. This is our choice. We have just these two options. And so my argument, obviously is that civilization builds, catharsis is a release, but it breaks things. So you smash all the stuff in your room, you look around, and you're like, oh no, I broke everything in my room. I felt better, now I feel really bad. That kind of attitude. I'm not going to go into that aspect, but civilization builds. But the point was that I actually shared a short vignette of my time that I got to spend with Charlie, which what a blessing that I got to spend time personally with this man. And Charlie chose civilization. So before I tell you that little story, I'll tell you another very little thing. Charlie challenged me, and I mean literally every time after the first couple times. Once we became friends, he challenged me literally every time I saw him, which probably numbers over 100 times we saw each other. I don't know how many. With James, what have you been reading in the Bible? Every single time. These are all private interactions, not on stages. Never happened on a stage, actually. Only in private. James, what have you been reading in the Bible? So just, that tie back to tradition, that root, this was part of what he was definitely interested in connecting to. And I had this pressure on me. I had to do it. Well, I'm not going to have an answer. Oh, I've been reading Exodus. What do I do? I have to have an answer, right? And I leaned heavily on the book of Numbers because I knew he liked it a lot. But as it turns out, there's an example that I used in that story to tell that Charlie was definitely on the side of civilization, not emotional catharsis. Even though he's a young man, he got mad, he spoke occasionally, rare for his age, but occasionally rashly and angrily. He's a human. Everybody does. I understand his frustrations were immense with some of the things he's dealing with, what he's seeing in his country. But I know he was a chooser of civilization because one time I had the great fortune of getting to go out on a boat with Charlie, a ski boat on a lake. We're going to have fun. I know you're trying to picture it and you're struggling, and So was I. And then I don't know if you're more struggling to picture Charlie having fun or me having fun, but we were going to have fun. And Charlie actually said, I had fun once and I hated it on the boat. He actually said that, and with his, smile and his goofy smile. And so he says this, and off we go. And, we're on a boat and we're playing fun pop style or, kind of, trendy music. It's loud. It's a boat, loudspeakers. All the other people on the other boats are looking over and everybody's seeing what everybody's doing. We're having a good time out in the lake, and we went water skiing and things. Charlie did not water ski, but I did badly. And then we, came back through, and as we got back after the water skiing, we got back in the boat, and the guy kicked it on, and he put on the music again, and it's some kind of like hip hop, I don't know. Charlie was like, can we change the music? What do you want to listen to, Charlie? Classical. He wanted to listen to classical music as loud as that stupid boat would play classical music in front of all those other people. So embarrassing. Because he believed in culture. He believed in what could be built by a civilization that dedicated itself to a process of building so much that it was his preference, even in the time of having fun. Fun will include the fruits of civilization, which cannot be had by breaking things, can only be had by building things. And so I'm certain that that's the choice he would make, even if there were rash moments in between. Personally, I think if Charlie was around to see Charlie get murdered, Charlie would have been pretty pissed about it. Or if if the shooter had missed, I think Charlie would have been pretty psycho for a minute, justifiably so, just knowing him. But he would have found his feet again, and he would have become a builder again, even if that moment came. If it didn't, it didn't. And he would have been a builder again, and he would have led a movement meant to build again, even if he wavered in a moment of anger. And so I know he would have chosen civilization, and I think that that's a fitting testament to his memory. And I'm glad you asked me to share that with everybody.
Thank you so much for your wonderful questions. Before closing the event, James, we want to give you a small gift, honoring your tremendous courage, love of Israel, and defense of Western civilization. So here is a coin, symbolize the freedom of Israel from ancient times to modern times. Thank you very much.
It says,
Herut Sion in English.
Don't believe him, it says $7,000 on the back.
Truly American. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Appreciate your coming, and hopefully see you soon in our next events. Bye.
תודה רבה.